Hi, everyone. I hope you had a great lunch break. I would like to introduce you our next speaker, Kropáček. He's a senior C++ engineer from Bohemia Interactive Simulations. Bohemia Interactive Simulations is involved in solutions for not only gamers, but for armies and United States Army or Army of Great Britain. So Miro will tell us about FPS and like beyond the FPS, how we can use the games to help the soldiers, the real ones. So come here, Miro, please, and I will pass you the mic. Thanks.
Raz, dva. Oh, do you also hate listening to your own voice? Wow, terrible. Good. Okay, we have this. Okay, so hello and welcome to my presentation. I'm happy that you chose this one, and I hope you will find it interesting. As I was already mentioned, I'm working for a company called Bohemia Interactive Simulations, and I work there as a software developer, so I'm not a CEO, so I don't have to brag about my company. I'm not a salesperson, so I don't have to sell any products. So I was thinking like how to approach this presentation, and I was thinking that since I started in this company 4 years ago, that was when the Košice branch was created, I started virtually just with blank paper. I had no idea about this industry, this gaming sector, you can say. I had no idea about military. I had no idea what are the rules, what are the requirements, and I had a lot of, I would say, wrong ideas or misconceptions. So I was thinking that maybe I could share my surprising discoveries or things I considered interesting, and hopefully we will find it equally interesting as well. So let's start with some classics. When the conversation starts, like when somebody knows that I'm working for this kind of company, they were like, oh, wow, you are working for the military, so they are just, giving a lot of money, right? Because they require like the best hardware, they require like super realistic simulations, that everything has to be like super realistic because they want to train in a world where everything has to be as close as possible to reality, because how else would you train, right? So when I actually ask them, like what I mean by the realistic, you get the usual answer, like, not only the graphics, but also physics has to be like, super real, and buildings has to be like destroyed like in real world. Explosions, of course, all kind of stuff like, I don't know, tracing projectiles by 1 millimeter, just as realistically as possible. Our expectations of us are, of course, driven by movies, by books, of course, by the video games. And this is where we get the ideas from, or maybe our idea how it should be, because it's always easier to learn, through stories. You have some emotion when you are looking at the movie or you are playing a video game. You're like, yeah, this must be like a real world because it was, so interesting, so touching. So reality is sometimes very, very different. For instance, even if you are like a real soldier and you are enlisted in an army and you go to some conflict, say in Iraq or Afghanistan, you'll kind of expect like, I will be in the fight, and I'll be like fighting the bad guys, and I will have to learn how to kill someone with bare hands and that kind of stuff. But the reality check is sometimes very surprising. This is actually a real picture. I'm not making this up. This is from our colleague who used to be a real soldier. He served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and maybe even somewhere else. And what they were doing most of the time was like the basic legwork. They were, talking to civilians. They were gathering information. They were scouting. They were mapping. They were maybe defusing landmines, and that was like 90% of their time. So even if you are like a real soldier and not, someone who would want to play like super realistic video game, you can be pretty surprised like how reality looks like. But all right, let's assume that you are sent after some terrorists, because of course that's what the soldiers do as well. So you would expect like, okay, so I go there with my buddies and we will just kill everyone and we'll be like superheroes and right, stuff like that. Unfortunately, here the good guy is dead. I didn't find a screenshot where he wins, so sorry. But even this is very, very misleading, because Now we can see like, yeah, okay, so you have to like, do your best. You have to be like really skilled, otherwise you will be dead in like 5 seconds. In reality, you are not going to be there alone at all. You are not going to be there even with your buddies. If there is a Counter-Strike map with like 30 terrorists, you would send 90 soldiers there, at least, like a minimum. So you can imagine it's actually pretty crowded there. And of course, if there is like 30 terrorists and they see like 100 soldiers coming in, they are perhaps not going to shoot after it. They're just going to run away. They are not going to, fight in a futile battle. So you see again, the reality is far less violent. So when we go back to the first slide, where we are talking about the realism of the games, you see the video games are unrealistically violent. It's like absolutely off the chart. It's not even a close, like 2 times as much. Because if you are doing work for 90 soldiers, if you are playing a single-player campaign in a video game, you are basically doing work for 90 people. So you can say that it's 90 times more violent than in reality. So to sum this up, this is like random set of points which average video game enthusiast or customer expects. There has to be like great graphics, of course, a lot of action, because otherwise it's boring. There has to be like intriguing campaigns, because again, otherwise you would be bored. You would be just what? Walking and shooting what? Birds, So there had to be like a really great story in there. You have to have challenging bots to fight against if it's a single-player campaign. And of course, it's very focused on keyboard, joypads, to have your experience very, very pleasant. Otherwise, you can read it in the game reviews. Yeah, controls were sucked because they didn't do a great job in that area as well. On the other hand, our customer, our company, expect vastly different things. They will ask you like, okay, so how far can I walk? Like, is it 1 kilometer? Is it 10 kilometers? It is 1,000 kilometers? They are very, very interested whether you can put civilians in there. And they would be doing, all these random things like walking, driving the car, gathering in a crowd. Like basic stuff, nothing really exciting. And of course, they would be interested in like, where can you walk? What can you do? Can you go to a building? Can you go to a car? Can you go to a hill? Can you go to a forest? Like, how far you can walk? And there are even smaller things, like, can I use the turn signals? Which is like really surprising. There are customers who refused an upgrade of one of our products because the turn signals didn't work. And they're like, no, we are not going to upgrade. We need the signals. So for them, it's like super important stuff. While for us, it's like, okay. So naturally, you can ask, like, so what the hell are they training for? Like, what can you train with this kind of skill set, right? And how can you even become a good soldier if you are just, training, walking on between civilians or something like that? So I was asking the very same questions. I really just didn't get it at all. So that's why we have this presentation. So how military works in general. This is what I stolen from my colleague, the same one from with the picture. He basically says that the military is very task focused. So they make a goal, a task, like, okay, what we want to achieve. They define steps, how they want to do that, and they will assign every one of the person, or maybe group, not every single soldier. They will assign like what they are supposed to do with their rank, with their position, location, with their job, because there are drivers, pilots, normal soldiers, riflemen, whoever. And every one of them has specific set of tasks which he's supposed to do and do them in the same way. So if you are in a desert, if you are in a snowstorm, if you are, I don't know where, you are always supposed to react the same way. So your colleagues, your fellow soldiers, can depend on you that yes, that guy is going to do that thing. Because if he's not going to do that thing, they rely on your behavior, you are not doing it, and they can't do their part. So it's like, falling apart. Okay. So now we can ask, like, okay, so how the computer games can help here? We learned, like, okay, what perhaps the soldiers are expecting or what they would like to train. And this is, again, just some random set of features which we provide in our product. Perhaps I will mention the convoys. Convoy, that's a like group of cars, maybe 5, 6 cars, the Humvees, the military vehicles. There are soldiers in there are gunners, there's driver. And you can ask, okay, so what can you train this? You can try like how to be a good driver, right? And the set of operation is quite surprising. For instance, what happens if there is a bomb exploding beneath one of the cars? And you would be like, okay, wow, that's surprising. And what are you supposed to do? Should you call someone? If you should call someone, it should be you or the guy in front of that car which exploded. What should you do? Should you, drive around? Should you wait? Should you wait for help? It's a lot of microscopic questions which needs answers, and these answers are trained in scenarios like that. They basically train like, okay, we have virtual radio, we have some other soldiers, some backups, which can go like in a multiplayer scenario, and we can train all of this. So it's quite, I would say, simple, but still has to be trained to the last microscopic detail. And then there is another thing. How would you actually train for this if there isn't some computer game, some computer simulation? Because imagine you have like these 6 huge cars, really you can even park them anywhere, and you would need to go to a city or some, suburbs or whatever, where there are roads, where there are houses, where there are other cars, where are other people. For instance, there is someone with his garden, and he's not going to let you pass his garden. So there is like angry civilians, for instance. And how would you train for this? You would need to hire actors. You would need to maybe buy some, abandoned part of city. And even if you achieve to do all of this, how often you could do that? Like 3 times a day? Can you do it every day? Can you do it once per week? And imagine you need to train, 50 convoys, because you are going to send them in different parts of the world. So it's very, very expensive, very, very hard to organize. And if you have a computer simulation, which is helping you with this, it's like huge help. So, of course, we can ask where the computer games cannot help, and this is the screenshot from the beginning. Surprisingly, they cannot help with shooting. Like the thing which is present in all of the FPS games, all of the shooters, right? It's like FPS shooter, right? And no, you can train shooting there. Same for aiming. You can't train how to, aim on a target using computer mouse or even a virtual reality gun. It's just not how it works. Again, I'm going to quote my colleague Andrew. He told me that if you actually really want to train shooting and aiming and manipulation with the rifle, the best simulation you can ever ask for is go to a parking lot, gather a group of soldiers, give them wooden sticks, and make them do pew-pew noises. Because with that, they can actually train everything you can think of which is important for rifle manipulation. For instance, even such a basic thing like how and when you should take the gun, the rifle, from behind your back. How can you train this using a computer game? But then with the stick, perfect. There is nothing more to ask for. So sometimes it's very surprising. So now we can ask okay, so military is probably not stupid. So they were thinking pretty early, how they can make their job easier when it comes to training, when it comes to using vehicles, when it comes to basically avoid losses. And first, it was motivated by basically just money, because even in the early 20th century, the planes were already there, but they were super expensive, super hard to build. And as you can see, there was some report which basically concluded, no, it's not like the planes are fragile or construction is unreliable. It's mostly the people. It's the human error which is making their plane crashing. So first they were okay, so we have to find some way how to prevent this kind of accidents. And that's also part of the deal that, yeah, you have to basically protect the pilot, because training a pilot is like super expensive thing. For instance, the US Army has, I think currently F-22s jets, for which when you want to train a pilot, it costs like $10 million per one single pilot. And of course, the jet costs like 100 million, but not important. Important is that you can't lose the pilot. So the first rule when you're training pilots or organize any training is that don't die. We already spent 10 million on you, please don't die. And then second rule, maybe save the plane. But first, don't die. When you compare it to every soldier, well, they will tell him like, yeah, don't die, but first make sure the pilot will make it. So it is mostly, or it was mostly money, but later there were other reasons, which I'm going to mention in a minute. So let's keep a little bit forward. How computer hardware, the development in the area, the computers were cheaper and cheaper, and there was a huge development every year. So of course, the military wanted to make some use of it, not only using the wooden planes, but also using this modern technology. And of course, since they got plenty of money because they are funded directly by governments, they could have an effort to build their own computers, their own graphic processors, their own simulation machines, you could say, which were doing exactly that one thing they were built for. And of course, it was like super expensive and everything, but they could do it. And again, first they started with just cabins, where you can train to be a pilot or a driver of some special vehicle or even a captain of the ship. You could still train to be a captain without sailing the real ship first. But later they realized they can use even something better. It was called SimNet. I will talk about it next slide. But I just wanted to show you, actually, even for the 80s, it's not so bad, right? You can see that there is an open world, there are mountains, the vehicles are also looking pretty decent. So it's not that bad. And for the 80s, that was basically state of the art. But the most important thing about the SimNet was you could network the cabins, the simulation machines. You could actually interact, the pilots, the soldiers, the drivers, they could, for the first time, they could talk to each other. Because this, as you will see, I think I have something about it later as well, you will see this is like a super important thing. Because you can train a pilot, he will be like, a total ace, like A+ pilot, and he will know how to fly the plane, he will be in the air, and then there is another plane. It is his buddy, or it is some enemy. And unless you have like a really good idea what they're supposed to do in that specific moment, you are basically lost. You can be the best pilot and they will shoot you because you thought that it is your buddy and it wasn't. So they are training for scenarios like this, like how to communicate with each other, how to divide the work, how to attack someone, who is going to be first, who is going to be last, who is going to be backup, and so on. So this was like a huge milestone. And as you can see, it actually lasted like for nearly 10 years before they switched to something else. So cooperation, it's really like the most important thing in the military. Of course, this was great, and governments, specifically the US government, they were spending money on all of these projects and experiments, and they were comparing like what works, what doesn't. But in 2001, an interesting thing happened. A company called Bohemia Interactive just Bohemia Interactive for now. I'm completely biased now. So Bohemia Interactive released a video game called Operation Flashpoint. It was, if you don't know the game, it was very, I would say, famous at the time. And it was like the first military simulator for an open world, where you could actually go anywhere. You could play for a Russian army, I think, because it was from the Cold War period. You could play for the good guys. You could drive vehicles, helicopters, planes. It was a lot of freedom in there. But we will get to that a little bit later. Why it was so groundbreaking, I would say. If we compare it to something else, which were like experiments before that. And you see even in the 80s, there were already some experiments with video games. For instance, I chose just 2 examples there. There's of course many more. The Battlezone was a video game by Atari. You could basically drive the tank. There was like vectorized open world. There was this 3D tank, and you can shoot after other tanks. And some US Army representatives, so like, yeah, okay, this is interesting. Maybe we could use it for training the gunners, so they would know, like, how to position the cannon, like maybe like what kind of force put in the. I'm really not sure what exactly you can do in such tank. But the point was they could train the aiming exercise there. And even 2 exemplars were built, but that was it. It was just a proof of concept. So it was interesting, it was working, but they did not follow through. Other example I chose was Marine Doom. Of course, it's based on the famous video game Doom. And again, it was an official US Marines work. So I think it was like 2 Marines who decided to try this out. So they created custom content, custom maps, custom textures. They were just, reusing some stuff from the Doom, of course. And as you can see, it's actually pretty realistic, right? You can, the light is a little bit distorting it, but you can see there is a battlefield. There are some obstacles. There is some shooting. But again, you have to ask yourself, like, okay, so what are you supposed to train with that game, right? Okay, because it's obviously not running, it's obviously not shooting, because we mentioned earlier. So it's still a game, right? You can't really use it for any tactical advantage if you train with that. And just one last thing I will mention before the Operation Flashpoint. It's America's army. You can see it has like everything. It's developed by the US Army. It was created after the Operation Flashpoint. It had like perhaps again unlimited funding. So you could think like, yeah, okay, they maybe see Operation Flashpoint and they just adapted it to their liking. But no, it's a completely different story. They just saw the fame of Operation Flashpoint. They saw like how many military fans is out there, how many people actually like, this kind of video games which are related to military. And they were like, okay, let's do a nice video game which will pretend to be like a real thing. And we will try to attract as many people to the US Army, to enlist in the US Army as possible. And actually, it worked amazingly good, because if you are an army, you have to hire like hundreds, if not thousands, people per year. And it's like super hard, right? How do you motivate someone to join an army? But this game worked amazingly well. But it was not for training, it was for recruiting. So, why is Operation Flashpoint different? As I mentioned, there was a lot of freedom, creative freedom, because the founders, the Spaniel brothers, they were also huge fans of military. So they had pretty good idea like how it should look like, what kind of freedom they expect from the game they would like to play. And they started working on it in 1997. But kind of bittersweet luck was that they were, after 2 or 3 years, they were really, really struggling to find a publisher. They were really, small Czech company, nobody really knew them. It was 20 years ago, so startups weren't really a thing. So they had like unexpectedly more time they wished for, and they were really, just traveling, into the UK, trying to find some publisher. But in the meantime, they had like office full of programmers and content creators and testers, which have to have something to do, right? So they were working on the game even furthermore. They just didn't stop. So they had like 2 more years to put like every idea, they could come up with. Like they were even organizing beta test sessions, from real fans. They would invite military fans, and they were like, yeah, guys, maybe you could add this feature, and maybe what about let's make it even more realistic like this one. So they were like adding features and features and features. They were adding content. They were adding maps. They were adding features to their editor. Basically, just they were brainstorming and doing it at the same time. So they had like 2 years more for this kind of work. And when they finally did find the publisher, it was Codemasters, I think, they had like interestingly well-made game, even if it were like bugs and everything, that's understandable. But when it comes to features, it was really, really way better than they expected to be in the beginning. So since the founders were also fans of the military and stuff like that, they also had this vision that they are going to keep in touch with community, they are going to release often patches, they are going to provide long support. And all of this led to quite an interesting outcome that the active modding community was born. There were like people who were creating new vehicles, new maps, new features even, because they were able to reverse engineer many of the game's features. And of course, the game wasn't really protecting anything. There was an open scripting language. There was nothing really hard-coded. Everything would be configurable. And the most important thing, they included the mission editor. Because nowadays, you don't really do that, right? You want to release a DLC, charge more money, or you want to even work on a sequel, and you want to use that tool for it. So why would you release the editor? Why would you give the users something they can create their own scenarios, and they wouldn't be interested in yours because they perhaps know way better what they want. And this all created an interesting mix of features, luck, maybe even interest, which wasn't originally planned. And even some soldiers and armies started to take notice, like, yeah, this is pretty interesting. This is something which really wasn't there before. Imagine this kind of open world game with their competitors, which were like Quake 2, right? It was like some different planet, really. Shortly after the release, one of the musicians, actually, I'm really not sure what is the story behind it, but it's quite amusing when you think about it. He was from Australia. He was from music band. I never heard of them, Seventh or something like that. Maybe you know better. And he approached Pete Morrison, who was another Australian. He was like signal officer in Australian Force or something like that. And they could actually see that, yeah, this Operation Flashpoint, it could be something more. Not just a video game, which is really liked by soldiers and all the fans, but maybe they could make a real product out of it, like adding features which are really important for the military, like we mentioned before, and still using the same engine, same technology, so they don't have to start from scratch. And shortly after, since there were all these huge modding community, there were many people absolutely excited about this idea, like, yeah, this is like great, let's join forces. So Mark, Andrew, and many others, they were basically flying to Australia just to join this idea, this new product. And it was really startup in today's eyes. Mark, in one interview, said it was basically a shed behind a farm. I'm really not sure whose farm it was, but it sounds pretty scary. So they were basically starting working on this product. I will tell you its name in a second. But in the meantime, I will mention another interesting fact. There was this thing, or this company, which was working on another spin-off of Operation Flashpoint called Star Wars Ambush. I'm really not sure what does it mean, but still, it's a name. And they just took the game, they took the freely available mods, and they basically sold it to the US Army. And the US Army connected, as you can see, some rifles there, some kind of VR, even, in the early days, it could be still useful. And within the United States government organization, especially the Army organizations, they were basically giving it for free. It was like kind of freeware between US government. And of course, a little bit later, the Spaniel brothers from Bohemia Interactive, they really were surprised to realize that wow, our game is used in this way. And of course, they had no money from it, because I'm not even sure like whether they are buying the original games or whether it was just pirated. So they were really hoping to strike a deal with them, and hopefully they did. So a little bit later, they got some kind of financing model for licenses, and money start coming to their hands, which was incredibly lucky for them, because their amazing publisher they were looking for so long, they just somehow partied their ways. They just there was some dirty battles between them, and the end result was that they didn't want to give them any more money, and they even took their name, the Operation Flashpoint name. So they were like really in a bad shape, and this deal really saved them. They could work on the Arma, which is like sequel to Operation Flashpoint, and they just could survive as a company. But in the meantime, Bohemia Interactive Australia, our distant branch, they were kept busy as well. They were working toward this dream, and I don't know whether they got great management or whether they got great contacts. But the point is, they really made it into the US Marine Corps and Australian Defense Force. Really, they were slowly starting to beta test the VBS-1 product. That was the name of their idea, Virtual Battlespace. And really, they were just hoping to, enlarge their portfolio. Now I realize that actually I'm not using this one. I'm just pushing space. These technologies. Anyway, the point is, maybe it's a little bit confusing, like what, US Army, US Marine, what does it mean? I actually did some research on this, and the US Army or military, it has like many different branches. There is like US Marine Corps, there is US Army, there is US Navy, there is Air Force, there is Space Force. I think there is a couple of others. And the interesting thing about them, they work pretty much independently. So if US Marine Corps are using this new baby, the VBS, that doesn't mean that US Army know anything about them. US Army, they were absolutely happy with their door wars. And when Pete and others trying to approach them, like, guys, we have this VBS, it's much better, they were, no, we are happy with that. We don't really want to, switch it. So it took like another 4 years. We released VBS2 in the meantime, when US Army finally folded, finally admitted, like, yeah, okay, the VBS2 has way better features than the base Operation Flashpoint with some mods. And this was like the game changer. Because if the US Army takes private company into their training, gives them a lot of money, that's my assumption, I'm not really sure. But still, they are getting paid by the Army. A lot of other private companies take notice, like, maybe we could also offer something for them. Before that, nobody would really think about it. They had these government projects. Nobody would really try to, get into government company and somehow, make a living out of it. But this was private sector. This COTs, it's something off the shelf. Well, it's private stuff, but basically commercial games. Well, so as we know, now we have Bohemia Interactive Australia, which is working on VBS, and we have Bohemia Interactive in the Czech Republic, which is still working on their stuff, right, on Arma. So now we can ask, like, what was the setup here? Because Bohemia Interactive, of course, were making money thanks to Bohemia Interactive Australia, but still, like, weren't they competing with each other? And the answer is no, because Arma was still a video game. Even if it was way less violent than other video games, still the primary objective was shooting, killing. That there was no, all the boring features the armies was asked for. So it was quite strange because players found it too boring and the military found it too violent. So in the end, they found some, some audience, and to this day, it's quite popular series, but still, from our perspective, it's just a game. No army, no military is going to, go for it. So fast forward to present day. As you can see, the guys in Bohemia Interactive Australia were pretty successful in the end. This is like our installation base currently. Shortly after the release of Arma in 2006, Bohemia Interactive Simulations was founded, which was another Czech company. So there was, at some point, actually to this point, there is like Bohemia Interactive in Prague and there is Bohemia Interactive Simulations in Prague. Very confusing for very many people, including myself. And as you can see, we are basically working with the good guys. So we are not selling to Russians, to North Korea, to Iran and that kind of countries. That's part of the deal, because if you work with US Army, you can't really work with, the others. And yeah, I have no notes. Yeah, I'm not really using it anymore. Wow. So for the end of my presentation, I was thinking like how to end it. And I got this idea that I will actually show you like how we are selling the VBS to our customers. So actually it's a kind of proof that I'm not making this up, but also it could be quite interesting, and there is some funny stories as well. So, in the early 2000s, it wasn't like that we made this game, this Operation Flashpoint or later VBS, and all army representatives were like, yeah, that's awesome, let's give it to us, They were also pretty skeptical, because they were used to these, huge simulators like the SimNet, right? And they were like, okay, that's great, you have this simulator, and there was these conferences, about military stuff, military simulation, because there is like magazine journals and stuff like that for this kind of industry. So there were like these trade shows, and they would came to our booth, and we're like, yeah, guys, we have this great simulator, it's called VBS, and you could train soldiers there, and it has all these great features. And they would be like, okay, so where is it? They would be looking for these huge machines, these huge cabins. I was like, no, this computer, there is the keyboard, and that's it. So they would be very, very skeptical. They wouldn't believe that you can use just a plain laptop, plain computer for trainings for which they were used to use like, whole rooms of computers. Yeah, and one of our most important or most convincing features or pitches, or how to say it, was that we still are including the mission editor. The mission editor from originally Operation Flashpoint, which has changed very little to this day. When I started in our company, and of course as a programmer you have to work with this editor from time to time, I was like, guys, when we are going to replace it? It's like horribly slow, it has all these features which are not very intuitive. I have to do like 5 clicks if I want to do this and that. Like why we are still having it? It's terrible. And they were like, no, we are never ever going to replace it. Like why? And it is because now it's like 2022. There is like maybe third generation of soldiers already training with our tools. So, if your instructor teach you something and you then, train with these instructions and in these scenarios, in this software, and then you pass the knowledge, along to your colleagues, and they will pass it to their colleagues and so on and so on, they basically know how to do the stuff they want to do perfectly, they have it memorized, and they don't want to memorize anything else. They know this works, it's fine, it suits their needs, and that's it. And that's why some of our features are never going to replace, because there is like 20 years of people using some features in some specific ways, and they're not going to, upgrade if we are change it. Other slide, I shamelessly stole from directly from our sales slides, and I just wanted to present one thing here. Look at the structure. First thing that I'm going to talk about is like training. Training, you can do all this cool stuff. You can train for this and that scenario. You can do it, on the network, because network is important, as we learned. And of course, there is content. We have all the vehicles. We have all the terrains. We have all the maps. And then there is like, the stuff, simulation, and so on. And on the bottom, there is like, we have this game engine, and that's it. There is like no mentioning any graphics, any sounds, any rendering capabilities. There is basically just, it's running on our engine. It's, owned by us as a company, and that's basically it. And if you're like wondering like why it is for saving money or what is the reason that the engine is not so important. And one of the pragmatic reasons is that you don't actually want to have it too realistic, or realistic too nice, too beautiful, I would say, because it will be distracting. Imagine that our maps has like beautiful waterfalls, and there is like fish jumping, in the rivers and stuff like that. And there is a guy who is supposed to, train radio communication. He will be staring at the stupid fishes, right? So you don't really want to make it too distracting. And in a way, flat shaded polygons are sometimes better than like super realistic textures, because for instance, what soldiers do, they learn how to recognize shapes, silhouettes, like they see a car from very far distant, and they were like, okay, so what kind of car it is? It is ours, it is the enemy's, it is, from that and that division, or is it my division? That kind of stuff. So then they don't really care if they like approach the car like, whoa, what a detailed texture. That doesn't make sense for them. But they really need to have the car, the shape they expect that it will be in the real world. Here, just quickly to sum it up, you see this is like the alpha and omega of the training. This is what we are selling to the soldiers. You can prepare your mission, you can do the mission, you can look what did you do wrong, and repeat. And the most important part is the green one, because this is where the learning curve is happening for them. It's not the walking and shooting. It's they are looking at the recording and they were like, I should have called that guy, or I should have cleared the path or something like that. So this is what we are selling. It's as simple as that. And this is just a short overview of the features. You see, if you take a time and read it, there is very little shooting, very little violence actually. It's like mostly like this boring stuff, navigation, first aid, you see some drills, some planning, that kind of things. So you can say like, oh, okay guys, you must be working on some really, really boring stuff there, right? And no, so I included one last slide to show you that actually, no, it's not that boring. It actually looks pretty decent. Even if the graphics is not so, I would say, main issue, we still need to keep up with our competitors. Like, we can't really present them a flat shaded world, right? So here you can see some mission, perhaps with a multiplayer mission, where there are helicopters, every one of them is piloted separately by someone over the network. There are some other players which are just soldiers, climbing down to the city and perhaps doing some kind of ambush operation or something like that. So yeah, this is what we are training for as well, or the soldiers are training for as well. And our QA is, for instance, creating scenarios like this quite often. So actually, I as a programmer, I'm very, very often surprised like what our product can do. I'm like, wow, we really have this. That's amazing, because usually I just have that one stupid soldier walking on the island and that's it. So when I see creating something like oh my god, that's awesome. Okay, so that's really the last slide. So now it's time for questions. Is that the monitor when I'm going to see the questions? Okay. Or if you don't want to type anything on that Slido app, you can just raise your hand and I will try to answer your questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for your speech. If there are some questions, please use Slido. If you're shy, if you're not shy, then I can pass you the mic and you can actually ask the question.
Thank you. How do you assess if civilians in Middle East are walking correctly or gathering correctly? Is this realism even necessary, or you just don't?
Well, it's not like they must walk in correctly, otherwise they wouldn't recognize civilians. No, it's usually, they are, if I may be so blunt, they're usually getting away. That you want to achieve a mission. For instance, you need to destroy some building, and you have to train for a scenario. There are first some civilians, so we have some kind of basic communications with the AI civilians, where you can please, spread around, go away, go home. And you have to train for these delays, for instance. So you have perfectly planned mission, the bombarders are already ready. There is a military waiting in the cars, and there is a group of civilians which are refusing to leave. So you have to count in some delay to your missions, for instance, based even on such a simple situation, right? So it's not like that we are training, some car chasing, with civilians, or that they are, walking somewhere and we have to follow them. It's really just this basic, life situations which can happen. It doesn't have to, but it can. So they are basically more like obstacles, if I have to be very politically incorrect.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question from Slido. Aren't you concerned about the ethical side of developing this kind of product? It's way different than creating just game.
I knew somebody would ask this. Yeah, so actually I prepared an answer for it, at least to some extent. Yeah, basically you can look at it like this, because in the end we really are helping an army, right? An army, even if we saw it in earlier, it's not always killing. There is always some killing, or some destruction of buildings or land or whatever. But well, when I look at it or when I think about it, it's more like why the armies are actually using the software, the VBS. They are not actually training killing operations, killing actions. We are not really aiming to learn them how to kill most efficiently. What they're actually training there is how to defend, how to defend civilians, how to avoid bloodshed, how to avoid much destruction, right? Because it's no good for anyone if there is like half of the city destroyed. So basically, if they prepare for attack from someone, they can minimize the damage, right? Because if there was like no preparation whatsoever, they were like, somebody's attacking us, and they will be just, shooting to anyone because they didn't prepare like how to save civilians or how to avoid, some collateral damage when it comes to civilian buildings. And I can give you a perfect example. Why do you think Russians are losing so heavily these days? I'm not going to say it's because they are not using VBS, but the Western army or Western officers are training them since 2014. And where do you think these officers, these commanders from the West gain their knowledge from? I can assure you that somewhere on a US military base, there is a map of Ukraine where they train for these possible attacks. Like what happens if Russians start attacking from the north? What happens if they start attacking from the sea? What happens if they start attacking with planes and everything? And I can assure you, this is like a real thing. I haven't seen it because, of course, it's classified. But they are preparing for scenarios like that. It is not only about Ukraine. I can assure you there is a similar scenarios for NATO countries. There is similar scenarios for each country, which has some army, some defense plans. And they are training basically for that. And to be honest, I'm pretty happy about it. I feel pretty good about it that now, maybe even thanks to our software, these guys are better trained and they can better defend their country. And yeah, I think that feels pretty good, at least, at least to me.
Any more questions, maybe?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was very surprised by the situation that the graphics actually it's not so crucial for the clients, because before you mentioned that they were like skeptical about these virtual training systems because it's not realistic, it's just a computer and the keyboard, and they wanted some math or they wanted some realistic, I don't know, VR stuff or whatever, have no idea. And now they don't even care about the graphics. It's kind of counterintuitive. Like I would assume that if you want to train somebody, you have to create as most realistic situation as is in the real life, probably. Like that's intuitive to me, but that's why I don't understand why it actually doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, sorry, perhaps I should have been more specific. Like what are the huge simulations, tools or machines or vehicles or cabins which they were using before about? It's not about that they are built, some rendering farm which has like the superior graphics, and it was like the main point. The main point of these cockpits, these cabins, was that they had like every single physical button in there. So you were basically in a Boeing airplane, for instance, and instead of windows, you would have like screens, and that would be your simulator. So actually the rendering part would be still pretty negligible. It wouldn't be so important. Of course, it's nice if you have like signs like, okay, this is ground, this is sky, but that's pretty much it. So it wasn't like the main point. It was expensive. They needed rendering capabilities because they needed open, huge worlds, but it wasn't the graphic fidelity, which was the important thing there. And basically, by the way, fun fact, we still sell or support manufacturers like that who are still making these physical cockpits, of the military vehicles, planes, special devices, even ships, where you can really train with physical buttons, physical displays, and we are just projecting the landscape. That's part of our business or portfolio as well. But then again, they are not asking like, okay, so is it as good as Unreal 5? That's never a question.
Yeah, I understand, but still I would, again, like, would be intuitive, or I would assume like they would want to have the game as not beautiful as possible, but as realistic as possible. Maybe use some scans, or maybe like make weather as realistic as possible, or these fishes like jumping out of the river. But because in reality there will be these fishes and they will be looking at them and
they shouldn't. But yeah, of course, over the time when the rendering capabilities are not so expensive anymore, of course, we are also making progress. For instance, the weather. That's a great question, because we are making attempts, and every new version has better and better support for random weather conditions, because weather is basically random, but still pretty, algorithmic. You can see some patterns there. And yeah, that's very important. That's very important. It's very important to be training, especially as a pilot in a storm or a snowstorm, right? So yeah, it's not like we are completely ignoring it. We are definitely always throwing in, but it's not our main selling point. We will never approach some military representative like, hey, guys, you are not going to believe what we are able to render now. That's really neither of their interest. Their interest is like, do you have hills there? Do you have roads? Do you have, different weather conditions? Do you have all the vehicles we are interested in? That's what they're interested in. So we can always do it. We can always make our products better, but it will be never the selling point. That's how it is.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions, maybe? Okay, I had one question. You were talking about the situations there soldiers are trained for example, the convoy and stuff like that. Are the soldiers actually creating their own missions, or are there their supervisors doing that, and they are just thrown into the situation so the supervisors can see how they would react, or how
that
works?
Absolutely. Of course, they have like field manuals, like what are you supposed to do, because you have to study as a soldier. It's not like they will just send you to a battlefield, virtual or real one, and then do your best. So of course, it's basically an exam. You study what are you supposed to do, and that was actually a very good question. Part of the success story is they wouldn't believe you that it's so easy to actually create your own content. Like, I can really put artillery there. I can order airstrike. I can order the AI units to attack me. I can really do it. Me as a stupid user, because we are military. We are not programmers. And they were really surprised how easy it is. So yeah, right now, our usual customer, even if I go to some military base, there are real soldiers. They are creating their own missions, and there are questions like, guys, this and this doesn't work, or how do I do this, because I don't understand the scripting language that good. And we will just help them to create it. And then you are right. There is an instructor, there is a class, there is like, I don't know, 30 chairs with computers, usually laptops these days. And really, they have headphones, and they're learning how to communicate, how to do all the tasks I've been talking about. And yeah, that's how they pass or fail. So definitely the officers, the commanders are now also content creators.
Okay, thanks. So thank you all for coming to this lecture, and see you on another one.